Imagine relying on others for every movement, every breath, only to discover the people you depend on aren't keeping you safe. In the US, 70% of wheelchair users experience preventable safety lapses, yet their calls for assistance frequently go unheard. Sometimes the silence becomes too loud to ignore. These numbers represent more than data. They represent lives like Heather's, a child who never spoke a word, yet whose silent strength resonates. Her impact echoes far beyond statistics, proving even the quietest lives can inspire our most urgent reforms. Heather's story began in the quiet charm of Gaffney, South Carolina, a place where golden autumn light filtered through the pine trees and the air carried the earthy sweetness of changing seasons. From her earliest days, there was a gentle stillness about her, as if she carried the calm of Carolina mornings in her very being. Even as an infant, Heather carried herself with remarkable serenity. Her thoughtful gaze appeared to hold a deep understanding beyond her years, observing the world with patient curiosity. Small hands moved with deliberate grace, but even the brightest lights sometimes face shadows. And for Heather, life, so full of softness and love, also came with challenges that no child should ever have to face. Research indicates that individuals with disabilities in the US face disproportionate challenges, with studies showing 70% experience difficult situations and 60% report facing barriers to proper care. Heather was a nonverbal child whose well-being was completely reliant on others. Her brother, who received state compensation as her caregiver, failed to meet her essential needs, creating life-threatening circumstances. Meanwhile, her parents, who should have been her strongest protectors, limited her contact with extended family and appeared to perceive her as primarily an obligation. When she was born, the doctors told her parents, David Eugene and Bobby Joe Baynard, that their baby girl likely wasn't going to survive. Heather had come into the world far earlier than expected, born prematurely at just 28 weeks. Even in those first fragile moments, it was clear her journey would not be an easy one. The doctors sat with her parents gently, their words careful but heavy. They explained that Heather had suffered a stroke while still in the womb, a silent, life-changing event that had unfolded before her first breath. Because of that stroke and the early birth, Heather's tiny body faced enormous challenges. The diagnosis was overwhelming: cerebral palsy, chronic lung disease, and epilepsy. She would experience regular seizures, and as she grew, her ability to move, communicate, and even breathe comfortably would be impacted. Doctors told David and Bobby Joe that their daughter might never see or hear. Her brain development, they explained tenderly, would be closer to that of a 3-month-old child, even as the years passed. Her complex medical needs required constant monitoring, yet for months she received no clinical follow-up. The wheelchair she relied on, left without maintenance, became a source of immobilization. But even in the midst of life's hardest battles, there are moments when pure joy breaks through. Moments when love, hope, and a little bit of magic offer a breath of light. For Heather, that moment came in the form of a wish to forget the hospital rooms, the doctor's visits, and the endless challenges, if only for a little while. Thanks to the incredible kindness of the Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Grin Kids program, Heather was given a gift every child dreams of: the chance to experience the wonder of Disney. But those magical moments were fleeting. Back home, Heather's care was quietly unraveling, and the brother paid by the state to protect her was cutting corners in ways no one yet realized. While Make-A-Wish had given her one perfect escape, the very people entrusted with her daily survival were failing her. As Heather grew older and her care requirements became increasingly complex, her family chose to transition her care to their home. Her older brother, Edward Vincent Baynard, assumed responsibility as her primary caregiver through a state-supported program. Employed as a certified personal care aide and respite nurse under Access Home Care, Edward received over $25,000 in state compensation, funds specifically allocated to ensure Heather received consistent, attentive daily support. This position carried significant obligations. Edward was entrusted not only with Heather's basic personal care and medical management, but also with ensuring she maintained regular contact with healthcare providers crucial to managing her condition. However, official records would later reveal concerning gaps in this care. During the final 16 months before Heather's passing, documentation shows no medical visits were completed. Even when remote healthcare options became available during and after the pandemic, there was no evidence of Heather receiving professional medical attention. An absence that investigators characterized as a complete failure to meet required care standards. The lack of proper care in Heather's final months led to that April night at the hospital, where the severity of her condition became undeniably clear. What medical staff and authorities later discovered was not just a sudden emergency, but the heartbreaking result of prolonged breakdowns in her care. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you to my amazing viewers and subscribers. Your support through likes, shares, and comments means the world to me. Your engagement helps make these stories even more meaningful. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our growing community of true crime enthusiasts.
Heather's tragic situation resulted from failures across multiple levels of South Carolina's support systems. As a child with significant medical needs, including quadriplegic cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and chronic lung disease, Heather should have received consistent professional monitoring. Documentation reveals numerous warning signs that went unaddressed. The agency responsible for supervising Edwards' caregiver services, Access Home Care, overlooked fundamental oversight responsibilities. State guidelines mandated in-person evaluations every 3 months to verify proper care standards. Yet records indicate a 17-month gap in home visits prior to Heather's passing. During later inquiries, the agency cited pandemic-related restrictions as justification, a claim contradicted by evidence showing other clients received remote check-ins during the same period. Edwards' employment records presented additional concerns, showing he allegedly worked 40-hour caregiving shifts while simultaneously maintaining overnight employment at a convenience store, all while neighbors reported hearing dogs howling for food at all hours in the background. Heather's former primary care physician, Dr. Evan Lowry, discontinued her care in 2020 following 3 consecutive missed appointments. Despite Medicaid regulations requiring notification of authorities in such cases, the practice merely updated her file as non-compliant without further action. This decision had severe consequences. The lapse in Heather's seizure medication prescriptions left her without crucial treatment for extended periods. The South Carolina Department of Disabilities and Special Needs, DDSN, demonstrated particularly concerning oversights. As Heather's designated case management organization, they were obligated to perform monthly welfare verifications. Their documentation reflects only 2 brief telephone contacts during 2021, including one 4-minute call where Edwards' assurances of "everything's fine" were barely audible over persistent animal noises. No in-person verification followed these calls. Remote healthcare options could have provided critical support during the pandemic, but the family declined all virtual visit opportunities. Medical records indicate specialists from MUSC Children's Hospital offered technology training and even provided a tablet device, which investigators later discovered unused in David's vehicle. The family maintained that Heather became distressed by screens, though no prior documentation supported this claim. Financial aspects of Heather's care created problematic incentives. Edwards' caregiver compensation at $15 per hour substantially exceeded standard entry-level wages. Income he reportedly prioritized by limiting Heather's contact with medical professionals. Simultaneously, the family continued receiving her full disability benefits while failing to provide fundamental care, with David later acknowledging in court proceedings that they viewed the payments as compensation for the challenges we faced. The depth of systemic failure became particularly apparent when reviewing posthumous case notes. A DDSN administrator's file notation, "Client expired, case resolved," exemplified how bureaucratic processes ultimately failed to protect Heather's well-being. This institutional response, while not intentionally harmful, reflected a high concerned attachment with irreversible consequences.
April 11, 2022, Spartanburg, South Carolina. When 14-year-old Heather Baynard arrived at the hospital, she was already in extremely serious condition. Witnesses remembered her father carrying her in without any sense of urgency, his calmness unsettling given how sick she was. Heather's body was cold, her skin pale and gray, showing just how much her body had weakened. She was completely unresponsive, beyond the point of crying out or asking for help. The medical team worked quickly, trying everything to save her: oxygen, chest compressions, medications. But Heather's body had been through too much. At 9:32 p.m., she was declared deceased. While doctors fought to revive her, her parents sat quietly in the waiting room. Her father scrolled on his phone, showing no visible distress as the medical team worked desperately just feet away. When questioned about Heather's condition, 𝐂𝐲𝐽 explained to medical staff that she had noticed her daughter's oxygen levels dropping dangerously low, reportedly as low as 30%. In response, she placed Heather in a bathtub, believing it might help. However, normal oxygen saturation levels should remain above 95%, and readings below 90% typically signal a need for immediate medical intervention. Heather's tracheostomy meant her breathing required regulated oxygen support, not physical stimulation. If her levels were truly that low, adjusting her oxygen supply would have been the appropriate action. Medical experts later confirmed, submerging a tracheostomy patient in water wasn't just useless. It could have accelerated her collapse by flooding her airways or triggering deadly spasms. The explanation raised serious concerns about whether Heather received the proper care she needed in those final moments, or if this was a desperate attempt to explain the unexplainable. What happened to Heather wasn't sudden. It was a slow, painful decline. When Cherokee County Coroner Dennis Fowler conducted the examination days later, he described it as the most severe case of inadequate supervision he'd encountered in his career. Heather's physical condition told a devastating story of prolonged hardship. Her legs had severe sores from being left in one position too long. Untreated infections had spread through her body. There were no signs of physical harm, just years of being ignored, until her body couldn't take anymore. Following Heather Baynard's passing on April 11, 2022, police began investigating her living situation. The next day, they searched her family's home on Camp Ferry Road and found extremely poor living conditions that concerned investigators. When officers entered the house, the conditions were so bad they had to wear protective suits and masks. The home was filled with large amounts of clutter and garbage, making it difficult to move around. There were obvious signs that basic cleaning and maintenance had been disregarded for a long time. Police found about 40 animals in varying states of distress: emaciated dogs chained near empty bowls, cats with untreated wounds hiding in the debris. One officer noted the stench of rotting pet food mixed with human waste, writing in his report, "The animals were starving alongside her." Heather's sleeping area showed particularly troubling conditions, with clear violations of basic hygiene standards. Cherokee County Sheriff Steve Muller later described the house as having dangerously unsanitary conditions, with animal waste throughout the home. The investigation showed these unhealthy conditions had existed for months or possibly longer. The dirty, cluttered environment likely created health risks for everyone living there, including Heather. Officials carefully photographed and documented the house's condition as part of their investigation. The evidence suggested the poor living situation may have affected Heather's health in her final months. When investigators talked to people living nearby, they discovered many had noticed signs of trouble at Heather's home, but didn't report anything. Some saw unusual amounts of trash piling up, while others heard disturbing noises, but didn't want to interfere in what they thought was a private family matter. This lack of reporting meant help arrived too late. After this case came to light, Child Protection Services took action to check on other families in the neighborhood. They found several households needing assistance and connected them with support services. Heather's experience became an important example that changed how the community responds to possible neglect cases. Local authorities use this situation to remind everyone that reporting concerns about a child's welfare isn't being nosy. It's an important way to protect vulnerable young people. They emphasize that when multiple people notice something wrong, but no one speaks up, children can remain in dangerous situations. New programs were created to make it easier for neighbors to report concerns confidentially. In May 2022, David, 𝐂𝐶𝐽, and Edward Bayard were taken into custody and faced multiple charges, including homicide, child endangerment, and animal neglect. The subsequent legal proceedings extended over several years, during which courtroom testimony and investigative evidence revealed troubling details about Heather's living situation. What began as standard legal proceedings would develop into one of South Carolina's most consequential cases, a 22-month judicial process that would reveal concerning care standards behind closed doors, until finally, through thorough courtroom examination, the full truth about Heather's situation would finally come to light. The Spartanburg County Courthouse was where Heather's case finally went to trial in 2024. For 11 long days, the court heard how what looked like simple neglect was actually something much worse hiding behind a normal family facade. Prosecutor Sarah Keys laid out her case piece by piece. She showed Heather's dirty wheelchair next to receipts for Edward's new computer, bought with caregiver money, then played security footage from a neighbor's camera, time-stamped to match Edward's logged caregiver hours. The video showed him leaving the house repeatedly while dogs barked incessantly inside. While he collected paychecks for caregiving, Keys told the jury, the records show he wasn't there. And those barks you hear, that's the sound of two victims, his sister and those animals, being ignored. The most shocking proof was pharmacy records showing Heather's seizure medicine hadn't been refilled for 9 months. Edward just said, she seemed fine without them. The defense's excuses fell apart. When David and Bobby Joe said Heather was too hard to care for, the prosecutor showed a video of them handling her medical needs perfectly during their Disney trip. Their lawyers claimed that pandemic stress caused the problems didn't hold up when evidence showed the parents took 3 vacations while Heather suffered. The witnesses made the courtroom emotional. Nurse Brianna Holt described discovering Heather's severe, untreated bed sores during her post-mortem examination. A child expert read texts where Bobby Joe called Heather "it" and complained about diaper changes. The hardest moment came when Heather's aunt admitted under oath that the family had talked about letting her go to make things easier. Edward's testimony hurt his case badly. He smiled inappropriately and claimed Heather liked being alone, saying her cries on a neighbor's security camera were just her singing. When shown photos of how thin Heather had become, he just said she was always small. Jurors later said this moment convinced them of his guilt. In her closing argument, Prosecutor Keys held up Heather's last baby tooth, found stuck in her throat during the autopsy, probably from years of no dental care. This, she said quietly, is what happens when people stop trying to care for a child. The defense's weak argument that the Baynards were just overwhelmed parents couldn't stand against the mountain of evidence. When the guilty verdicts came in, life sentences for David and Bobby Joe, lesser charges for Edward after his deal, Heather finally got justice. The judge's words said it all. You didn't just fail Heather. You treated her like she wasn't human until the very end, leaving her no relief but an escape she never should have faced. There were no cheers when the sentences were read, just quiet sadness for a girl the system should have protected. On October 31, 2024, the court reached its decision. David and Bobby Joe Baynard received life sentences for their roles in the events leading to Heather's passing, along with additional penalties for child neglect and related offenses. Edward Baynard was sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Heather Baynard's story could have been reduced to a footnote in a case file, another tragic statistic in a system that failed to protect its most vulnerable. But Heather was never just a number. She was a child who found magic in the floating lanterns of Tangled, whose hands fluttered like fairy wings when she was happy, whose small crescent moon birthmark made her uniquely her. These are the details that bureaucracy erases, but they're the ones that matter most, because they remind us that behind every headline is a human being who laughed, loved, and deserved so much more. Her passing in 2022 didn't just leave a void, it forced a reckoning. South Carolina's Heather's Law now mandates in-person welfare checks for medically vulnerable kids under state care, closing the gaps that left her invisible. The 40 malnourished animals found whimpering in her home, some so weak they couldn't stand, became Heather's silent witnesses. Their preventable conditions inspired cross-reporting laws. demonstrating neglect affects both human and animal welfare. And courts can now override parents who isolate at-risk children, because Heather's extended family might have saved her if only they'd been allowed to see her. Yet the uncomfortable questions linger like shadows. The autopsy showed Heather had clenched her hands so tightly during untreated seizures that her nails left half-moon marks in her palms. Did anyone hold those hands in her final days? Neighbors admitted they'd ignored the ammonia stench seeping from the house for months, dismissing it as just a messy home. How many red flags do we all walk past every day? Systems can be reformed, but the hardest change is in ourselves, to stop assuming someone else will act. So let's talk about what awareness really means. It's not just about grand gestures, it's about the quiet moments of attention. That wheelchair on the porch that hasn't moved in weeks, the dog that won't stop whining next door, the faded "for rent" sign in front of a house where you haven't seen the kids in months. These are the whispers before the tragedy, the chances to intervene before it's too late. Heather's story screams a simple truth. Survival shouldn't depend on being noticed by the right stranger at the right time. As the screen fades, one line lingers in white text. For the Heathers still waiting, may we learn to see what isn't shown. It's not an ending, it's a challenge. Because stories like this don't conclude with a verdict or a law. They live on in the choices we make tomorrow. Will we be the neighbor who knocks, the stranger who calls, or just another bystander telling ourselves it's none of our business? The credits roll, the video ends, but the question remains: what will you do with what you've just learned?